Thank you, Cathaoirleach. I welcome the opportunity to speak at committee stage, or second stage, in relation to the proposal to give statutory footing and powers to the Land Development Agency. And as we all know, housing was the dominant issue at the time of the last election. It was the dominant issue during the lifetime of the last government, and it remains a very dominant issue in society today. Of course, it has been and is being challenged by issues as a result of the pandemic and the impact it has had on different sectors, but the onus of responsibility of this government is a great one to address the housing crisis. And at the time of the preparation and discussions around preparing and agreeing a programme for government between the government parties, this was an issue that was to the fore. And this was an issue, and the competency and potential of a land development agency was discussed at length, and there was a commitment on the part of all parties pertaining to that agreement to prepare and bring forward legislation to give effect and impact and potential by virtue of increased powers to a land development agency to play its part in resolving this issue. And there are various tools, various opportunities and various avenues by which, of course, the housing situation can and should be addressed. They're broken down into the local authorities, and despite record levels and amounts of funding being available to many local authorities, we do not see enough houses being delivered by those local authorities. We see social housing associations having an all too increased role in the provision of housing solutions, but they are solutions that do not afford the opportunity to those whom acquire or who avail of those units the opportunity to buy them out, which is something I believe must be available to anybody who has that opportunity. We've seen the Part 5 provision within private house building and the potential that it can yield to the state. And we've seen in recent times, thankfully, the restoration of the 10% affordable element of that provision. But unfortunately, again, the issue of supply is one which means that tool, that avenue, is not delivering as it could and as it should. And we also then see local authorities being forced, because of the nature of the crisis and the need to provide instant solutions, to be in a position whereby they are competing with young, affordable or purchasers in buying out stock. And while that was a solution for some councils and a welcome one, it wasn't a solution for many people whom were seeking to get on the ladder to buy such houses and have that competition available against them. So the provision of an affordable scheme, the provision of rental units, cost rental units, the provision of the Land Development Agency as an added tool to address this issue is one that has to be welcomed. And when I think of the potential, predominantly people see many lands in state ownership, not in use. Not necessarily lands in local authority ownership, but in state ownership. And at the time at which those lands became available to the state through whatever means, at the foundation of the state and thereafter, it was their contention and their belief that such lands had specific uses, whether it be, for example, as an example, an army barracks. And now when you see an army barracks, for example, not in use, of no benefit accruing to the community in which it resides, there is ample opportunity, one would expect, for the state to make a new decision on those lands. And in this instance, it has the potential to make those lands available for housing, for public housing, for affordable housing, and for housing to the general public, because they are all the supply chains that need to be replenished. And the ability of local authorities is not one which is necessarily challenged by this agency, by the Land Development Agency. And I had this out with councillors in my own constituency in recent weeks, because there is a fear, of course, and when that fear is expressed, that there is a belief that somehow their role, their potential to contribute to this crisis is threatened. In the first instance, and I welcome the commitment by the Minister and the Government, in the first instance we are looking at populations in urban centres of over 10,000 in the first instance. They are looking at those lands that are not necessarily in local authority ownership, but that are in the ownership of the state, that need to be used for the benefit of the rest of us. And by the rest of us I mean to address this crucial issue. And I welcome the means by which there is provision for the Land Development Agency to address the fears and the concerns there always was when it was initially set up, and that was this issue about state intervention and about state rules and about tailoring the Land Development Agency to be in a position to make a contribution and not to be curtailed by those same state rules. And the means by which the Minister has done that is to be welcomed. And the ability thereafter for the Land Development Agency to make a telling contribution is at their behest, and they are answerable to the Minister and to the Government, but they can work in conjunction with all others whom have a contribution to make, whether it be the local authorities, whether it be the private sector and the state, because we all want to contribute and we all want to provide opportunities for everybody on every stage of the ladder and to make a meaningful contribution to resolve this issue. And there is, you know, the contention and the expression by some that this is merely to appease builders, and this is merely to appease developers. This is merely to appease them in their aspirations to make as much as humanly possible at the expense of others. That might be suitable for those that oppose this. That might be suitable for those who wish to oppose every proposal that's put before us without coming forward with credible alternatives themselves. But this government, as I said earlier, is hell-bent on addressing the issue of the housing crisis, is hell-bent on assisting different aspects and different tools and different means by which it can be addressed. And I mentioned earlier local authorities. Many local authorities, unfortunately, have lost, I won't say the will, but have lost the wherewithal, the expertise, and it would seem the ability to deliver the amount of houses that it did in the past. And that's something we have to acknowledge, and that's something that we have to press upon local authorities and the members and the executives to come and improve their performance and improve their ability to provide those units. And one such tool that was provided again by this government is the increase in local authorisation that is available to them without going through the four-stage approval process, whereby the increase is from 2 million to 6 million. And that gives some ownership to the local authority members to identify lands that is in the ownership of the local authority and to put them to use. And it's imperative and it's important that we and others hold them to account and hold the executive to account and allow them, their members, to participate in finding solutions locally that they can contribute towards, and not be frightened by this prospect that they say is a train coming down against them. That's not the case. And I think, you know, there should be ample time and space given to the government to allow this process, this agency and all that's contained within it, the ample opportunity and time to ensure that it does its job effectively and makes the contribution that we believe it can make. Another issue I just wanted to mention in the context of this, and it's something that I spoke to the Minister about recently and have his full and wholesome support, and indeed the input of his officials and department in bringing forward relative legislation to give effect to the intention of putting on a statutory basis the length of time Bord Pleanála have to make a decision on appeals or on decisions if applied to them directly based on the legislation that's afforded there presently. The situation presently cannot be allowed to continue, whereby on Bord Pleanála can take as long as they believe is necessary to make a decision. There's too much invested in this. There's too much invested in the form of people's expertise, people's monies, and votes in those of us who have a responsibility to ensure that the atmosphere is right for applications to be made without an arm of the state holding up such applications. And another element that is no help or assistance in our efforts to move these developments on is this whole avenue now of judicial review. And I know many strategic development zones which have successfully gained planning permission from An Bord Pleanála are then faced with the prospect of judicial review and more time wasted. And I'm aware of many who have invested heavily, whom are, have had great trouble and difficulty in accessing finance, and find themselves being funded by funds from outside the state. And the great surprise there is on those that fund those schemes to hear that you have permission but you haven't permission, by virtue of the fact that you've got permission from your local authority, by virtue of the fact that you've got permission from An Bord Pleanála after a lengthy period of time and procrastination on their part, without the necessary legislation that I mentioned being in place to curtail them to a statutory time period, and then faced with the prospect of a further length of time for future adjudication by the courts in relation to a judicial review that is taken in relation to the administrative aspect of the application through that process. And many of those funding schemes find it wholly inappropriate, wholly amazing to think that here we are at the third stage, and here we are, more particularly from our perspective, in the midst of a crisis and being held up by these administrative planning delays, which in no way reflect the urgency that we want to bring to bear on addressing this issue. So, in the context of us discussing the Land Development Agency and its potential and the provisions that are there within the legislation on the part of the Minister, and I'm glad to hear too during the course of the debate to date that he has said that there are many suggestions and amendments that are being put from many members that will be considered during the process of the evolving legislation, and especially in committee stage when it can be explored even more. And I welcome that commitment, and I look forward to many in this House having a contribution to make to improve elements of the authorities and legislation governing the Land Development Agency, ensuring that it does what we want it to do. And basically what we want it to do is to be in a position to take over lands in state ownership that are not being used presently, that can be put to good use in the form of provision of housing, put to good use in the form of the development and the provision of an affordable housing scheme, which hasn't been there, despite all the talk and all the rhetoric and all the ideology over the last number of years by many on all sides of the House. Here we have a proposal that sets about putting that in place. Here we have a proposal that sets about delivering on that proposal and making a firm contribution that people can see the potential of an impact and the potential of them being in a position to finally afford a home. And for those that don't necessarily want to travel down that route, that there is the potential for rental schemes, cost rental schemes, which have a wider appeal to many young people, especially nowadays, because of the nature of the jobs that they're in, because of the nature of the way in which they want to live their lives and have the opportunity to move and not be held down by the cost of properties and associated with a purchase. And also to take advantage of the advancements in infrastructure, especially in our cities as well, that they can be in a position to avail of much of the provisions that are within this scheme. So, to reiterate again, my support for the Land Development Agency, my support for the provisions that are contained within this legislation, my acceptance and thanks on the part of the Minister to make the potential for amendments and improvements from members across the House, to reiterate to councillors especially that this offers no stick to beat them. This offers an opportunity to take lands that are not necessarily in their ownership, but has the potential to go off their lands in their ownership if they're left stale, if they're not used, if they're not put to use. And that's many years down the road, because it has a lot to do in the meantime in the first instance. It also, as I said, has the potential, by virtue of the proposal from the Minister, to put an affordability lien, you could say, on the lands, which gets over the state aid problem that was there and that was a worry right up to this point, and that is a huge and telling contribution, and the rate at which he sets that will be appropriate to the lands and its location and the lists and the expectations, and indeed in conjunction with consultation with the relevant local authority, with the relevant planning section, and with members in those areas whom too have the expertise, whom too have the knowledge and the experience as to what is needed in their constituencies by virtue of the sites that come up in them for taking into charge by the Land Development Agency. You know, I had thought at one time that it could also have at its disposal a suite and builders whom are available under contract to do work on its behalf, with a view to leasing back to local authorities long term thereafter for social units. And that too is to be welcome. But of course our opponents and our detractors would say, again, you're helping and assisting builders. Well, the bottom line is, as I often said, you can't have a house unless you have a builder. You can't build a house unless you have the relevant tradespeople, unless you have the block layers, the engineers, the carpenters, the plumbers, the labourers and so forth. And they are in every community, and they are in many of our families, and they too have to be assisted, and they too have to have at their disposal relevant and appropriate schemes and initiatives to help this country and its inhabitants be in a position to own their own home, or to have available to them the opportunity to rent a home if they so wish at cost price rather than at market price. And this vehicle that is the Land Development Agency has within it the potential to realise that ambition, and it's the first time we can say that with degree of definitiveness that is necessary, and this legislation is necessary in order to copper fasten that. And you know, in 2 to 3 years we can look back at its effectiveness and its ability to deliver and improve upon it, or scrap it if necessary. Nobody has a monopoly on solutions here, but we have a responsibility as a government party initially to put in place a programme for government that addressed one of the major issues, and possibly the major issue during the lifetime of the last government, but more importantly during the course of the last election. And that responsibility has been taken on board by the parties in government with various proposals, with various schemes and initiatives and policies that seek to address this housing crisis, and this is one of them, one of many, and I support it, welcome it, and will work with those whom are bringing it before this House to ensure that it can be strengthened and that it can do what we want it to do, to play a major role in addressing what is a major crisis that hasn't gone away and won't go away, and most definitely won't go away in the absence of legislation and potential that is contained within what's proposed before the House presently. Thank you very much.